David Lynch, a painter-turned-avant-garde filmmaker whose fame, influence, and distinctively skewed worldview extended far beyond the movie screen to encompass television, records, books, nightclubs, a line of organic coffee, and his foundation for consciousness-aged education and world peace, has died. He was 78. His family announced the death on social media on Thursday, but provided no details. In 2024, Mr. Lynch announced that he had developed emphysema after years of smoking, and that as a result any subsequent films would have to be directed remotely. Mr. Lynch was a visionary. His florid style and unnerving perspective emerged full-blown in his first feature, the cult film Eraserhead, released at midnight in 1977. His approach remained consistent through the failed blockbuster Dune, 1984, his small-town erotic thriller Blue Velvet, 1986, and its spiritual spin-off, the network TV series Twin Peaks, broadcast by ABC in 1991 and 1992, his widely acknowledged masterpiece Mulholland Drive, 2001, A Poisonous Valentine to Hollywood, and his enigmatic last feature, Inland Empire, 2006, which he shot himself on video. Like Frank Capra and Franz Kafka, two widely disparate 20th-century artists whose work Mr. Lynch much admired and might be said to have synthesized, his name became an adjective. The Lynchian is at once easy to recognize and hard to define, Dennis Lim wrote in his monograph David Lynch, The Man from Another Place. Made by a man with a long-time devotion to the technique of transcendental meditation, Mr. Lynch's films were characterized by their dreamlike imagery and punctilious sound design, as well as by Manichean narratives that pit an exaggerated, even saccharine innocence against depraved evil. Mr. Lynch's style has often been termed surreal, and indeed, with his troubling juxtapositions, outlandish non sequiturs, and eroticized derangement of the commonplace, the Lynchian has evident affinities to classic surrealism. Mr. Lynch's surrealism, however, was more intuitive than programmatic. If classic surrealists celebrated irrationality and sought to liberate the fantastic in the everyday, Mr. Lynch employed the ordinary as a shield to ward off the irrational. Performative normality was evident in Mr. Lynch's personal presentation. His trademark sartorial style was a dress shirt worn without a tie and buttoned at the top. For years, he regularly dined at and effusively praised the Los Angeles fast food restaurant Bob's Big Boy. Distrustful of language, viewing it as a limitation or even a hindrance to his art, he often spoke in platitudes. Like those of Andy Warhol, Mr. Lynch's interviews, at once laconic and gee whiz, were blandly withholding. This baffling effect led Mel Brooks or his associate Stuart Kornfeld, both of whom facilitated Mr. Lynch's first Hollywood feature, The Elephant Man, 1981, to label him Jimmy Stewart from Mars. Perhaps in response, Mr. Lynch chose to identify himself as Eagle Scout, Missoula, Montana, defining his style. The first child of Donald Lynch, a research scientist for the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Forest Service, and Edwina Lynch, David Keith Lynch, was born on Jan 20, 1946 in Missoula, but lived there for only a short time. The family soon moved to Boise, Idaho, and then to Spokane, Wash. The deep timberlands of the Northwest left a profound impression on Mr. Lynch, providing the settings for Blue Velvet, Twin Peaks, and its 1992 movie prequel, Twin Peaks Fire Walk With Me. Donald Lynch was transferred east. His family relocated first to Durham, NC, and then Alexandria, VA, where David attended high school and became interested in painting. After graduation, he attended the Corcoran School of Art in Washington and the School of the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, before entering the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts in 1966. Philadelphia, then in a state of urban decay, was a revelation. The city had a great mood. Factories, smoke, railroads, diners, the strangest characters and the darkest night, Mr. Lynch said in a 1997 interview. I saw vivid images, plastic curtains held together with band-aids, rags stuffed in broken windows. Mr. Lynch, whose morbid, faux, childlike canvases were made under the spell of Francis Bacon, began incorporating film loops in his paintings. Although he dropped out of art school in 1967, he remained in Philadelphia for another 3 years, painting and making short films. In 1970, he received an American Film Institute fellowship and relocated to work on the feature project that would eventually become Eraserhead, an unclassifiable movie that Mr. Lynch would always associate with Philadelphia. Eraserhead concerned a depressed young woman and a bewildered young man with a freakish coiffure cohabiting a hellish industrial urban nowhere, their conjugal life rendered unbearable by the mewling of their hideous mutant offspring, which resembled, but was never identified as, an animated skinned rabbit. Remarkably crafted, Eraserhead was 4 years in production and required another 3 to consolidate an audience. Ben Barenholtz, the exhibitor and distributor who pioneered the Midnight movie a half a dozen years earlier with Alejandro Jodorowsky's El Topo, opened Eraserhead at the 0 hour at Cinema Village in New York in late 1977. Voluptuously drab, hallucinatory yet visceral, the movie was confounding. Despite its nauseating special effects, Eraserhead seemed too arty for the grindhouses of 42nd Street. Supported by a word-of-mouth audience, Eraserhead played the Cinema Village through the summer of 1978, then opened again at midnight a few blocks away, and, a year later at the Waverly, the venue that incubated the Rocky Horror Picture Show cult, where, adopted by a downtown audience, it played for 2 years. By then, Mr. Lynch had been discovered by Hollywood. Mel Brooks engaged him to direct The Elephant Man, a movie based on the life of Joseph Merrick, a severely deformed man who became a celebrity in late 19th century London for his company Brooks Films. Although staid when compared with Eraserhead, the film contains several passages, notably the Waltz of Terror when Merrick is trapped and unmasked in railway station urinal, that gave Mr. Lynch free rein to display his gifts, a commercial as well as a critical success, garnering 8 Oscar nominations. The Elephant Man resulted in a more elaborate commission. Mr. Lynch was hired by the producer Dino De Laurentiis to adapt Frank Herbert's cult science fiction novel Dune after several earlier attempts fell through. Dune was an influence on George Lucas's Star Wars, but if Mr. De Laurentiis expected another Star Wars, he was disappointed. With its primordial, impressively nasty special effects, Dune, 1984, was not a Saturday afternoon kiddie show. Neither was it an art film. There are no traces of Mr. Lynch's Elephant Man, Janet Maslin wrote in her New York Times review, but the ghoulishness of his Eraserhead shows up in the ooze and gore distinguishing many of the story's heavy. Although Dune was a commercial failure, Mr. De Laurentiis bankrolled Mr. Lynch's next film, Blue Velvet. Appearing midway through President Ronald Reagan's second term, Blue Velvet turned Reagan's Morning in America campaign inside out, a spellbinding blend of raw pathology and kabuki sweetness. The film, Mr. Lynch's first personal project since Eraserhead, ruthlessly exposed the depravity behind a picture postcard facade of malt shops, football fields, and rec room basements. The heart of the film, which starred Isabella Rossellini, Dennis Hopper, Laura Dern, and Mr. Lynch's sometime alter ego Kyle MacLachlan, is a 20-minute sex scene replete with voyeurism, rape, sadomasochism, implied castration, all manner of verbal and physical abuse, elaborate fetishism, and a ritualized kinkiness for which there is no name. Both hailed and reviled, Blue Velvet was rejected by the Venice Film Festival. Mr. Lynch's scarcely less controversial follow-up, Wild at Heart, starring Miss Dern and Nicolas Cage as a young couple on the run in the American Southwest, won the Palme d'Or at the 1990 Cannes Film Festival. That same year, Mr. Lynch scored an even greater triumph when he conquered network TV with Twin Peaks, a haunting, often bewildering inquiry into the death of a high school homecoming queen. Even more than Blue Velvet, Twin Peaks, made in collaboration with Mark Frost, seethed with bizarre and, as in any Lynch film, bizarrely ordinary characters, including a straight-narrow investigating FBI agent, Mr. MacLachlan, F.I., James Cameron observing his illness from a distance with unbitten teeth in Paris, where he says, "A near-insensation sensation, Twin Peaks earned 5 Emmy Award nominations for its first season. Its mystery was dispelled when the killer's identity was revealed a third of the way into the second season. Nevertheless, the show staggered on, hemorrhaging viewers over its next 13 episodes." Mr. Lynch provided a Twin Peaks prequel in Fire Walk with Me, 1992. Inverting the premise of the series, the film placed the murdered girl at center stage in a self-referential drama of teenage wantonness, replete with rape, incest, and voodoo. It's not the worst movie ever made, it just seems to be. Vincent Canby wrote in the New York Times. Mr. Lynch had better luck when he and Mr. Frost revived Twin Peaks in 2017, picking up on the cliffhanger that ended the original iteration a quarter-century before, albeit withholding Mr. McLaughlin's stellar FBI agent until the final episode. After Fire Walk With Me, Mr. Lynch came perilously close to self-parody with Lost Highway, 1997, an earnestly trippy, tenderly adolescent, strenuously sinister evocation of rockabilly badness written with Barry Gifford, a film noir aficionado whose novel formed the basis for Wild at Heart. Mr. Lynch then reversed course with a premise so shamelessly feel-good it might have even embarrassed Steven Spielberg. The Straight Story, 1999, dramatized the true story of Alvin Straight, played by Richard Farnsworth, a 73-year-old Wisconsin man who piloted a John Deere lawnmower 240 miles to visit an estranged brother.